And there we are. That is an absolutely extraordinary result. This is terrible, isn't it? And it's a total rejection of your politics, of your style of politics in the Labour Party and everything that you've done with the Corbyn project.
Well,
Brexit and Trump. Two ballot box revolts that, though different in many ways, shared one clear thing in common: the fury they provoked from the establishment.
This was a whitelash.
Racist populism is out of the bottle.
Politicians and commentators in Britain and America denounce voters as uneducated, racist, deplorable.
What I call the basket of deplorables. The racist,
small-minded,
homophobic,
wrong-headed,
sexist,
mean-spirited.
you name it.
Surprised that some hyper-privileged rich bellend telling 17 million people that their vote shouldn't count didn't win hearts and minds. What a shocker that the left affiliating with smug, patronising, self-righteous, sanctimonious, out-of-touch celebrities didn't work. I mean, who could have predicted it? You want to know why you lost? Because you think that calling people racists on Twitter to score virtue-signalling brownie points from other woke idiots translates into votes. Newsflash. It doesn't. You think using mob intimidation to shame people into adopting your worldview is a winning ballot box strategy. Newsflash, it isn't. How many defeats do you have to suffer before you begin to realise that? Judging from your reaction, you still haven't learned.
Calling anyone who voted Leave or was thinking of voting Tory thick as shit. How could we possibly have lost? Once again, the strategy of calling anyone who was thinking of voting differently to me self-serving, inward-looking, stupid, racist, leave-voting scum paid absolute dividends, didn't it?
Not my Prime Minister! Not my Prime Minister! Fascist bastard! Not my Prime Minister! Not my Prime Minister! Not my Prime Minister!
Jeremy Corbyn. We won the argument.
sure, Dan.
You had the worst result for Labour in 85 years. Yeah.
The people who had long been forgotten, but now cannot be ignored. About how we got here and where these populist revolts might be headed next.
The tectonic plates are shifting. The people whom you would rather not hear from are now having a voice.
Let's start at the beginning. 2016, the United Kingdom, where a decades-long debate about the European Union was about to come to a head.
There had been Eurosceptic feeling in Britain for a very long time before the referendum was even talked about. But in truth, it started to grow as a serious influence in political life around the mid-2000s.
40 years or so, people hadn't had a say on the European Union question, and there was a groundswell of opinion which was developing over recent years against the European Union.
If you look, for example, at the National Centre for Social Research, that tells us that for 20 years before the referendum, over half of the population either wanted to leave the EU altogether or radically reduce the amount of power that the EU has.
It was partly a response to growing immigration and the way in which the EU was acting, the kinds of issues that were affecting the EU, particularly the Eurozone.
The European Union is a vociferously anti-democratic institution. Members of the European Parliament don't have the right to initiate legislation. All of that is done by unelected European commissioners.
So there was a strong sense that sovereignty, decisions made about this country should be made by people within this country and not devolved or given away to the EU. Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, pledged that the Conservative Party would hold a referendum if it won the general election, partly in order to try and deal with this kind of looming political challenge from UKIP.
And I will go to Parliament and propose that the British people decide our future in Europe through an in-out referendum on Thursday, the 23rd of June.
David Cameron was convinced the British people would vote to remain, but he failed to appreciate just how distant many voters had become from politics, and that the referendum would become an opportunity to remind Westminster that they were there.
If you think about the evolution of British politics up until the referendum, we've seen the number of MPs in Parliament who have worked in working class occupations, manual jobs, crashed to 3%. We've seen the Labour Party effectively write out working class interests. As a political project, it's become more interested in the university-educated professional middle class, and that has had consequences.
The disconnect with working class people is now profound, and so they don't understand their lives, and they increasingly treat working class voters as if they're some sort of embarrassing elderly relative. You know, they want their vote, so they need to keep them on board, but they don't really want to be seen in public with them.
The general view of most people was that Britain would choose to stay in the EU, would choose to remain, and all the political parties, except for UKIP, the main political parties, backed staying within the EU.
The establishment were clearly all in favour of one thing, Remain, and all of a sudden the people thought, well, actually, I've got an opportunity here to shake the establishment to its core. I can't do it in a general election. This opportunity has never been presented to me before. Yes, it might create a bit of turbulence. Yes, it might even hit me in the pocket in the short term, but if it's the only way I'm going to force my masters, my political masters, to listen to me, I'm going to take it.
At 10 o'clock, the polling stations close after weeks, months, years of argument, and we'll have the answer to the question that's haunted British politics for so long. The British people have spoken, and the answer is, we're out.
On the 23rd of June 2016, 17.4 million people, the biggest democratic mandate in British political history, voted to leave the European Union. It sent shockwaves through the British establishment. Just a few months later, another, perhaps even more unexpected, political earthquake struck the US.
He is a three-time married, Playboy bunny dating, Howard Stern radio guest that, has no problem saying whatever he wants, whether it's true or not. And they voted for him over, when I say you, I mean the establishment. He beat out 17 other Republican candidates, and he beat out a woman who has been destined, according to her biography, to be president since the 90s. In 2015, when he first announced, he came down the gold elevator. A lot of people really laughed at him.
Which Republican candidate has the best chance of winning the general election?
Right now, Donald Trump.
What they missed in that moment was that he gave a very populist speech, very reminiscent of Bill Clinton's speech in 1992. And it was all about pride in work, getting people back to work, and coming together for the future.
Trump had the good fortune of having Hillary Clinton as his opponent. But I think that Trump also touched on a number of sore points, that question of the border and control of immigration, unauthorized illegal immigration across the border.
Trump managed to reach beyond the existing Republican base to Rust Belt towns and cities ravaged by deindustrialization and ignored by the coastal elites.
I often tell my friends in New York or Washington or Los Angeles, of the larger, more cosmopolitan areas, imagine, if you will, if 30% of your town just had moved away because the jobs had all left. Buildings boarded up, windows broken, and the population is gone. And imagine every time you turned on the television, the media was saying, you need to move. Your Manhattan isn't where it's at anymore. You need to leave your family and regroup because your town isn't coming back. And oh, by the way, you're dumb and you're stupid.
To just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? They're racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
So that basket of deplorables statement, I think, was a watershed. Of course, it echoed a similarly controversial statement that Barack Obama had made in the 2008 campaign, He allowed that the people who were working class and ought to have been natural democratic voters are clinging to their guns and their religion.
She doesn't understand that she's talking about her fellow countrymen and women. And she's talking about them with such disdain.
He knows. He said, you know, we were dead, and now we're really a vibrant industry again. And you know, another industry that's vibrant, it affects you a little bit less, but it affects everybody, is steel. The steel industry is coming back like I've never seen anything because of what we've done. We've done, with all the dumping, they're not doing so much dumping anymore, but the steel industries are coming back. And you know, when they do dump, they're paying a lot of money on the dumped steel that they're sending in here. And it goes right into the coffers of our country, and that's okay. But U.S. Steel is opening up 8 plants. Nucor and others are opening up plants. Some of them are spending close to $1 billion on a brand new plant. The steel industry is one of the great things to be talking about. So the manufacturing jobs are back. They're coming back, and they're coming back at levels. Economic growth, as you know, last quarter, 4.2. New unemployment claims recently hit a 49-year low. Median, think of that. I mean, I'm going through them like, huh. No, think of it. Median household income hit the highest level ever recorded. That's not bad, right? These are some of the biggies. American pensions have grown more than $2 trillion in value since the election. I said before, African-American unemployment, the best ever. The best ever, lowest number ever. Hispanic American, Asian American, women 65 years. Sorry about that. It's I like history better, right? Historic as opposed. I joke, but on women it's 65 years. Best numbers in unemployment in 65 years. It's good.
I think the Trump and the Brexit revolts were very difficult for middle-class liberals. It was, in effect, the first time that many of them had lost. And overnight, many had gone from being winners to feeling like losers. The initial reaction was basically to pursue a very simplistic one-factor explanation. It was the hillbillies in Kentucky, or it was the white working class in Clacton. There was a lot of sneering, there was a lot of dismissal.
Too many were driven by nostalgia for a world where passports were blue, faces were white, and the map was coloured imperial pink.
It's just absolutely appalling that a political establishment can regard so many millions of its countrymen and women in this way. And what they've absolutely failed to pick up is that fundamentally these are decent people. The vast majority who voted Leave were not racist, but they did so for values of sovereignty and democracy and self-government. The sort of liberal class in this country have redefined the terms Nazism and fascism. So they've changed what it means to be one of those things. So now any kind of traditional opinion that 20 or 30 years ago was entirely mainstream in this country is now treated as if it's a far-right opinion.
It's been based on racism and xenophobia.
We live in a place where we're very, very open to other cultures, and unfortunately it turned out that not everyone is so.
But in truth, most people who voted Leave have said in many polls that they are not hostile to migrants, they don't have racist views, but they do want to control immigration. And I think as long as some parts of the media and some politicians assume that that's the same thing, xenophobia is what's driving that, then they will always have, I think, a much more unfair and negative picture of why this country voted to leave.
I can still recall Van Jones saying on CNN on election night, was a whitelash. It was white voters reacting against the fact of the country's first African-American president.
We've talked about income, we've talked about class, we've talked about region. We haven't talked about race. This was a whitelash.
I don't doubt that in some quarters of the American electorate, what Van Jones had to say was true. But I don't think that was the main factor.
It's very easy to compartmentalize and call I think for people who don't understand what happened, to compartmentalize and say, this is who the Trump voter is. They're white, they're old, they're dumb, they're bigots. That's them. That's the only reason this could have happened. There's no other nuance with these voters. And they continue to say that. They didn't understand what has been happening in this country, I would argue, for at least 10 years.
You're not having a terrible, terrible dream. Also, you're not dead and you haven't gone to hell. This is your life now. This is our election now. This is us. This is our country. It's real.
The people have spoken. Donald Trump will be the next president, the 45th president of the United States. And it will be up to him to set up a team that he thinks will serve him well and reflect his policies. And those who didn't vote for him have to recognize that that's how democracy works. That's how this system operates.
This is your life now. This is our election now. This is us. This is our country. It's real.
So one of the interesting things about the 2016 election is the amount of support that Trump got from working class, typically Democratic constituencies, from labor unions, from voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, constituencies which voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012 and ended up voting for Trump in 2016.
Erie, Pennsylvania. A city on the Great Lake Erie is one of those Obama, Trump communities. We met Joe Arengia, a local businessman and passionate Trump supporter.
My name's Joseph Arengia. You're at my business, which is Joe's Gym in Erie, Pennsylvania. Okay, Erie, Pennsylvania is a city on the Great Lake Erie, and it's really nice about 7 months a year. The other 5 months, sometimes it's hell.
Erie is a good microcosm of understanding how America went from supporting Barack Obama twice to Donald Trump. Job losses and population have really just bled throughout that area. And people turned around and looked at their community and said, you know what, it's worth saving. And that's the guy that's going to do it. Because he showed up and asked for our vote. He showed up and said, I see what's happening here, and I'm going to make a difference. They hadn't heard that for a very long time.
The people of Pennsylvania, and in particular, our friends at Erie, we're going to bring back our jobs to the United States.
It used to be an incredible industrial town. We used to get a lot of different business from all over the world in Erie. And over the years, a lot of it disappeared. My dad raised 7 kids. As a janitor, we had food on the table, we had a car, everything was going good. You couldn't do that nowadays.
Dominic's was once the after-work spot for workers coming off shift at the factories that once lined 12th Street. But many of those businesses and workers are now long gone. The owner of Dominic's, Tony, let us film in his establishment, so long as we agreed not to talk politics.
My name is Tony Ferraro. I'm 42 years old, restaurant owner. The meatball omelet, yes, that's what put us on the map, so to speak. Anybody that knows Dominic's knows the meatball omelet. I was born here in Erie, lived here my whole life. Just definitely seen a lot of changes.
I was a bridge builder, iron worker. I put up buildings. I put up a lot of the buildings at GE. I put up the big buildings at Hammer Mill. I worked there for 2 years straight. And then things started going to pot. Everything started going downhill. They've actually tore down half the buildings that I put up. In fact, Erie's population, because of these businesses shutting down, we used to average like 350,000 people in Erie. Now we're down to about 250,000. It's getting smaller.
In its heyday, 12th Street was it. That was the main strip. A lot of factories, a lot of industry, but just the economy, and over time, they moved. They just find better places to be, I guess. But when they're gone, and that ultimately affects all the businesses around.
Erie's a tough Democratic town. But when they're running the polls, I noticed well, like I was saying, I was driving 8 miles. I counted 22 Trump signs. I counted 2 for, I think his name was Gary Johnson, and I saw 2 for Hillary, and one said Hillary for prison. But the polls say Trump's losing, and I'm like, no way. Fake news. He's giving us some hope here that it can change. I says, Obama did the same thing, hope and change. But I saw what he was doing, and I'm going, what? What? So I says, it didn't work. So it's time for a new idea.
Back to Brexit land and to the Essex coast, an area which voted heavily to leave. Southend-on-Sea is just an hour-and-a-half's drive from London, but politically it feels a world apart.
Well, I voted to leave the European Union the same reason as loads of people from this area in Essex, because they were sick and tired of being ignored. People in this area found their wages have gone down and they've seen massive changes to their communities to no benefit for themselves, and they've got no say over it. And so they voted in their droves to get out of the European Union, to give the political establishment a slap in the face that they think they needed.
I voted to leave the EU. I voted because I'm a fisherman. I've seen my industry smashed to pieces. I would have thought 99% of the fishing industry were voting leave. We lost their control. And my industry has suffered probably more than any other. There is already a shortage of fishermen, let alone fishing boats, and the grounds that we've got to work have got smaller and smaller. The Thames estuary has been affected badly because we're right on the closest part to Europe. We have Dutch, Belgium and French vessels working up to our 6 miles. Many of the people that I know are from all backgrounds. They were all voting out. You know, before it happened, you know, I've got fishermen and acquaintances abroad phoning me up. You are going to vote out, aren't you, Paul? Everybody's going to vote out. Give us a chance. We hate what's going on. And that's from ordinary people.
Working class people who deal with the realities of the world as it is, they don't see themselves as special, they see themselves as part of a community, and a community that's under siege in a lot of ways. They don't feel like they're being represented by anyone anymore. And I think this has given them the confidence to say, we have got a voice and this is how we feel.
As someone who travels the world, I often walk by a television program, and it's called Program for a reason, with the local media, and can't even believe what I'm seeing or hearing. And the US and every other Western media is no different. It's literally top-down propaganda and bears little to no resemblance of reality.
Might call the post-2016 reaction in the West is that all of this stuff, this populism stuff, is just bad, it's terrible. Almost every book that's come out has been talking about the death of democracy, Trump is Hitler. It's fundamentally flawed. If you look at every major survey across the West, public support for democracy is extremely high. People say they want to live in a democracy, and for them, that's the preferred system of government. But what we are having is a debate about what type of democracy we want to live in.
Yeah, I do hear this argument. This is a proto-Nazi, this is a kind of fascist development in American society. One must stand in opposition to it. It's an extreme, almost a hysterical reaction, I think. It is an indication of people who for too long have had their way at the editorial pages and in the college classrooms and so forth and so on. And they've been accustomed to winning without arguing. The sky is not falling, I want to say to those people. Rather, the tectonic plates of American politics are shifting. They're shifting in ways that people whom you would rather not hear from are now having a voice. Some of those people don't agree with your presuppositions.
Populism, in many times, is viewed as sort of out of control and angry. This particular form of populism is very aspirational. People want to be part of something bigger than themselves. What they're against, they have a legitimate reason to be opposed to, because they have failed these people either through bureaucracy or through being tone deaf. And that people miss that about this movement.
Populism is one of those words that's often used as an insult. It's implied that you're trying to appeal to the basest instincts of the masses, that you're appealing to the lowest common denominator. And that's why populism as a word has become so popular in a way. It's a very convenient tool to discredit your opponent's arguments.
And the one word most often used to discredit these voters? Racist.
I've got 4 biracial grandchildren. I love them to pieces. It has nothing to do with racism. I used to live in a ghetto on the east side. Half my friends were African Americans. This is the guys we played with. And they come up with this race thing all the time. Knock it off.
This has been a multiracial society for decades, so the idea we've suddenly turned into racist is ludicrous. I know people from ethnic minorities who voted to leave, and they feel exactly the same way as white people. So to use it as a racist slur on it is not a real representation of what happened.
Those trying to overturn Brexit plan to do so with a second rerun referendum, a so-called people's vote.
Now there's this sort of big campaign for what is completely misnamed a people's vote, which is, being funded by big business people and is largely populated by members of the political establishment who didn't want Brexit in the first place, but are presenting their campaign for a second referendum as more democracy. I mean, these are people who, in many respects, have completely ignored democracy over the last 40 years in terms of the sort of stream of EU legislation that has come our way, and that they've had no interest in looking at or blocking.
One side spoke, the other side has, instead of replying to those concerns, that side has basically said, well, how do we overturn it, or how do we discredit the entire referendum? You had turnout rates at 72%. It was the highest rate of turnout for a quarter of a century since '92. So you had this mass engagement, and while you've had various people running around on Twitter saying, oh, well, this wasn't really a legitimate democratic exercise, it was entirely a legitimate democratic exercise because so many people took part.
If they just go against their vote, I mean, you are looking for the word civil war. People will rise up. They were very, very motivated. And as they keep saying, it was those people in places that didn't vote that got out of their chair and went and voted. So yeah, I think it's a very serious matter and it must be seen to move forward.
Oh yeah, it would be quite shocking. I think it'd be awful, you know what I mean? Because then it's not a democratic vote, is it? You know what I mean? It's people try to manipulate people, and I don't think that will happen. I really don't. I'd be very surprised if it did, and I'd be very annoyed if it did.
In the US, some still hold out hope that Trump can be impeached, clinging to the now discredited claim that he colluded with Russia to get himself elected.
The impeachment thing is a total hoax. The numbers have totally swung our way. They don't want to see impeachment, especially in the swing states. They've swung our way. I've never seen a swing like this because people realize it's a total hoax. We had a perfect conversation. It was only a conversation. Nothing came out of the conversation except good relationship with Ukraine. And the people see that it's just a continuation of this 3-year witch hunt.
If Trump is impeached, I don't even want to imagine that. I don't think it'll be very good for this country.
I've watched the corrupt government over these years. My theory was, this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right. Now they're proven it wasn't right this whole time.
The notion that we've got to get him out at all cost worries me deeply. I worry about this because those people are not going to go away, even if President Trump goes away. If you don't defeat those people at the ballot box, if you usurp their expression of democratic intent through extraordinary means, you invite the reaction. The way to defeat Trump is to get 50.1% of the vote and vote him and those who support him out of office.
The elites claim that populism is a regressive force, but maybe they have it the wrong way around.
People call Make America Great Again nostalgic, looking backwards. not for these voters. This was part of something bigger than themselves, a connection to each other.
It forced onto the agenda a number of grievances. Had we not had the referendum, we wouldn't have been aware of those, or we wouldn't have been talking about them to the extent that we will be in the coming years.
What so many so-called deplorables seem to be crying out for is not division or isolation or some illusory bygone era, but for change against a ruling class still clinging to the status quo.
They always say change is as good as a rest, and I think now the time is we need to change. If we do change, I just feel personally that it'll be positive.
It's a fight for democracy against rule from people they've never heard of, or don't want to be ruled by. They want to be ruled by themselves. And in fact, this is a part of the ongoing process of democratisation of society that makes us civilised.